Our appointed text from Mark's Gospel opens just after one of Jesus' so-called passion predictions, those sayings of Jesus in which he tells his disciples that they are going up to Jerusalem, where he will suffer and be handed over and be killed, and on the third day rise again. As I pointed out last month, Jesus teaches the 12 about his coming passion 3 times in Mark's Gospel. And this is now the third and final time he tells them this. And true to form, the disciples' response is less than inspiring. James and John coming to Jesus with a bold request, jockeying for the best positions to sit at his right and left in glory, seeking positions of honor, not understanding that greatness isn't the point in God's kingdom, that there is indeed something greater than greatness. I think we are meant to hear and remember in this passage from the 10th chapter of Mark, that from the 9th chapter, which we considered last month, when the disciples again did not understand what Jesus was saying and were afraid to ask about his teaching, so they decided instead to argue amongst themselves about who was greatest. To which Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." And even before that, when Jesus first predicted his passion, way back in chapter 8, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And Peter rebuked Jesus, saying, "No, Lord, this should never happen to you." To which Jesus sternly replied, "Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." The things of men. Greatness, privilege, power. So too did the disciples have a decidedly this-world understanding of not only what greatness is, but what the arrival of Messiah would be like. And it did not, in their minds, look at all like what Jesus was saying about the Son of Man being rejected and suffering and being killed. That wasn't what they had in mind. They thought it would be all glory and greatness and good riddance to the Roman oppressors, with the long-awaited Messiah come marching spectacularly triumphant into Jerusalem to take up his rightful throne. And if Jesus is this Messiah, well, then it would stand to reason that his faithful disciples who had left everything behind to follow him would, perchance, be granted positions around that throne, maybe even positions of honor on either side of it. After all, hadn't James and John, as well as Peter, been chosen to accompany Jesus in significant events that the other apostles didn't experience? Look up the phrase, "and Jesus took with him," in the Gospels, and it is almost always followed by these 3, James, John, Peter. At the raising of Jairus' daughter, for example, we might recall that Jesus did not allow anyone else to accompany him inside the house except for James and John and Peter. So too were these 3 granted the privilege of witnessing the transfiguration, when Jesus took James and John and Peter up a high mountain, and he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became blindingly white, and Moses and Elijah, personifications of all the law and the prophets, appeared before them, and spoke with Jesus, revealing his divine nature. These 3 are surely in the inner circle of Jesus' ministry. And James and John said to him, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." And here, in Mark's 10th chapter, Jesus defines for them, to their astonishment and ours, what glory and greatness really look like in God's kingdom. Greatness and glory, Jesus says, look like a cup, like a baptism, like service. "No problem," the sons of Zebedee boast. "Sure, we can drink the cup that you drink and be baptized with the baptism with which you are baptized." "You do not know what you are saying," Jesus responds. Unlike James and John, we hear this interchange from the other side of the cross, just as we are meant to hear echoes of all that has preceded this moment as the disciples walk up to Jerusalem with Jesus. We know everything that is about to come. The next time we will read or hear in the Gospels about someone taking their place on Jesus' right and Jesus' left is at Golgotha, with two common thieves being crucified alongside the Messiah, with one of them pleading from the cross, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom," and with Jesus promising, with one of his last breaths, "I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise." Or how can we hear Jesus say, "Are you able to drink the cup that I drink," and not think ahead to the night before he was crucified, when out of all of the disciples, he took with him James and John and Peter to the Garden of Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives, where he asked them to stay awake and keep watch while he prayed, just a stone's throw beyond them. And he prayed, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." Do James and John really understand what they're asking for when they say they are able to drink the cup that Jesus drinks, or to be baptized with the baptism with which he is baptized? Do we? They sought positions of honor, not understanding that in God's kingdom greatness and glory have nothing to do with power and privilege, but about self-sacrifice and service. And in this moment, Jesus redefines what it means to be great, what kingdom greatness looks like. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. In the 10 lines of Mark's Gospel set before us, we hear the words cup and baptism over and over again. So too are serving, servant, being served, and slave repeated. Great and greatness are threaded throughout. But then Jesus adds a single word just once with no need for repetition, even if we do hear echoes of it in his cup and in his baptism. Did you catch it? The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, Jesus says. And it would be something if he had just stopped there. But Jesus goes on to say that not only did he come to serve, but to give his life a ransom for many. A ransom. Indeed, the Greek word we translate as ransom appears here and only here, just once in Mark's Gospel, and only one other time in all the Gospels, in a parallel verse in Matthew. Ransom is a very good translation. It could also be translated as redemption. The word meant just that in the ancient world. A payment to set free or release someone from some state of bondage, unable to do so on their own, whether from slavery or prison or debt. Christ, our great Redeemer, came to serve and to give his life a ransom for many, for us. His life, our freedom. How great thou art. This profound ransom note from Mark's Gospel ought to encourage us to consider what keeps us hostage, what holds us captive, what binds or enslaves us, especially in this fallen world. For the ultimate kidnapper is clever and wears any number of disguises in our increasingly secular times, from social media, don't tell me it doesn't imprison us, to soundbite politics, from anxiety to fear, cynicism to apathy, selfish desire or pride, the way in which we are enslaved to our pride, to our needing to be right or to make others wrong, or the opposite, our looking the other way. Make no mistake, we are all prisoners of our own doing. we would do well to consider these two great words, ransom and redemption, and how they speak to our lives here and now. The astonishing gift of ransom and its mighty consequence, our very redemption. For it is at the very heart of everything we profess and do as we gather around and drink from the cup that Jesus has given us, and why we say in the liturgy of Holy Eucharist, we celebrate the memorial of our redemption, O Father, in this sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving, and why we offer not only gifts of bread and wine and beseech God to sanctify them to be the sacraments of communion, but also, in the beautiful words of the old rite, we offer ourselves, our souls and bodies, to be a reasonable, holy, and living sacrifice, and beseech God to sanctify us also, that we may faithfully receive this holy sacrament in order to serve God in unity, constancy, and peace. There is something that is greater than greatness. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be servant of all. The world has always had a different idea of what it means to be great. We are left wondering if it is even possible for human beings to attend to, never mind attain, the greatness that Jesus is speaking of. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant." That is a new definition of greatness. The good news, Dr. King said, is you don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity or the second theory of thermodynamics and physics in order to serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. We might also consider the example of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, someone who recognized this gospel idea of greatness in a powerful way, serving the poorest of the poor, truly living as servant of all. She taught by example and explained in her own words, the fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. The fruit of love is service. And the fruit of service is peace. Her words can encourage us to similarly hear in our gospel message that if the fruit of Christ's ransom is our redemption, well, then the fruit of our redemption ought to be service. Begin with simply being quiet, as Mother Teresa says, practicing stillness. We can do that. And in that stillness, we will find prayer, which leads to faith, which leads to love, which cannot help but lead to service, and ultimately full circle to peace on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.